of the Lord from Proverbs 25, 6 and 7. Do not put yourself forward in the king's presence, or stand in the place of the great. For it is better to be told, come up here, than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. And from Luke 14. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. When he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come up to you and say, give this person your place. And then, in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your friend comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
All right, fighters, take your corners. You ever watch a TV show or a movie and you know that something is about to happen, and it starts to happen and the person does something that's so embarrassing that you just cringe as you watch the train wreck unfold right in front of your eyes? I forget the guy's name. He's one of the characters in the TV show Friends. David Schwimmer has this knack for doing, I just can't stand anything he's in, because he always does this. Well, I have a story that I'm going to tell you briefly, because I have lived this wedding feast thing a little bit. When I was about 24 years old, I was invited to a wedding banquet, and the groom was making a little speech, and I was in my Navy uniform. And he looked over sort of in my direction, but not directly at me, and he said, why don't we hear a few words now from our military? And I immediately thought it was me, and I jumped out of my seat and strode across and started to take the microphone, and he said, Charlie, no, it's my brother. He's in the Army and he's not in uniform. I was absolutely so humiliated. I can't even tell you how embarrassed I was as I slumped back down to the lowest place. 20 years later, I'm in Afghanistan, I'm the IC commandant, I'm at a change of command, the people that are changing command actually work for me, and I sit in the back, and I wait until maybe they say, oh, Captain Conway, come up front. Is it because I've learned this great lesson? At that point in time, no. I was just so humiliated it lasted for 20 years. I think in this case, and here's my quick interpretation, I'll turn it over to Marta. Jesus is giving us practical advice, but he's also saying the way that we typically do things is not the way it works in the kingdom of God. We live in a system where I do this and I have the right to that. If I pay you this, I have the right for you to do this. And Jesus says it doesn't work like that. It doesn't, and we don't necessarily like it either. But we have to give up our rights in order to be able to receive the gift.
believe that each of us, let me do this, I just went through my notes. Deep in our hearts and souls when we were born, God hovered over us. And God's sacred spirit hovered over us. And I believe that there is this knowledge that we all have that tells us that we shouldn't do something. Some people call it a conscience. I call it your soul, or God talking to you, or something in your spirit that says this is right. And I think each of us know that to be first, to try to, go through the line quickly and get ahead of others, that isn't what we're supposed to do. And I think down deep in our core, we all know, and Jesus is reminding us of this, is that there's this deep knowledge that is at odds with our society, with our cultural norms, and even sometimes with the doctrine of our religion. I laugh at that because as we were trying to get one, I'm like, well, I'm an Episcopalian, and so I can only sit at certain tables. And that's what I'm talking about. Jesus says there is no one's excluded, and that everybody, the last shall be first. And what's so important to understand is everything that has breath and life, everything that has breath and life has that divine grace from God, each of us. And it's not hard to see it, that everything that has breath and life, because when something is born anew, a baby, you know there's God. And we're supposed to relate to each other as sacred. Everything that has breath and life is sacred. When I look at each of you, you are sacred, beloved people of God. That's a truth. Everything that God created. When Charlie brought in the squash and was so happy as if he birthed a baby. That is seeing the sacredness of life and the growth that comes from that. We know that God exists, and we know that all things in relation to that. But what's interesting is, I love the picture that Charles showed. Notice there's something missing in the picture. I'll let you take a look at it. Think in your mind what's missing in that picture. At that table. Half of the image and voice of God, at least. There's no females. Did you notice that? Back then, females, we didn't even think like we had a place card at the table. Have any of you seen that Citibank commercial? I absolutely love it because this is so true. And I think females get this. So the men who are trying to get at the table, they ride the escalator that's going up, right? And they can walk a little fast and maybe get in front of each other and hear the words of Jesus saying, hey, it's not who's first or who's, at my right or my left. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. And those who are lame, crippled, or blind may not even be able to get there because everybody who thinks they have a right have already beat them to it. And for us females, we're on an escalator that's going down and we're trying to run up it. Does that make sense? But yet, aren't we wonderfully created? But this is what I mean is that everything that has breath and life is good. And our differences are good. If you look at any third world country, it's because they cut out the half of the voice of God. There's no room for them at the table. We learn from diversity and each other, from people who are not like us, from the other. Those who have a different perspective. Those who've been on hard times and are suffering. All of us learn within that. I want you to think a minute, what is sacrilege? I don't think we talk about it, and this is what I think Jesus is talking about. What is sacrilege? Sacrilege means to try to take possession of the sacred, to use it for one's own end instead of to revere it. So if everything that has life and breath Because remember, that holy first kiss, we breathed in the Holy Spirit of God. If that is sacred, when we try to move and get ahead of others or not allow people at the table, are we not committing that offense? And so I think that's what Jesus is trying to say. And of course, I just proved that women say things 3 times longer than any guy. So sorry, honey.
That was really good. You know what? It did not occur to me that there is not a female at that table. I picked that picture based on history and the parable, and thank you, Marta, for pointing that out. I read something this week. Barbara Brown Taylor was participating in a conference, and they went around the room and said, "Who was Christ for you this week?" And someone said, "Oh, it was the little old lady at the grocery store that gave me $1." And someone said, "Oh, it was the person that let me in line." And someone said, "Oh, it's the person that did this." And Barbara Brown Taylor said, "It was the person who showed me something in myself that was lacking. And it hit so close to home that I wanted to punch them in the face." That's who Jesus was for me this week. So I don't want to punch you in the face, but thank you for pointing that out. That's true. There are no female voices there, and I agree with you. I think what I hear you saying is when religion is used to stomp out parts of God's sacred voice, that to me is blasphemy and sacrilege as well.
Well, it's not just religion, it's society, it's cultural.
Right. So I want to play a movie clip because I think we're getting close to the same page here. I played it before, and I'm going to keep on playing it because I love Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers was a Presbyterian minister, and I wish I could be more like Mr. Rogers, but I can't. But I love his theology. When we think about everyone being sacred and every human being, every creation having dignity and worth, listen to the theology in the song that is played here. It's about 3 minutes.
We wrote because Jeff was going to have a spinal fusion and be in they call it a halo, metal rim, and then cast on his shoulders and bolted
all the way down his trunk.
Yeah.
We
He may
went
not
through-
have survived the surgery. And so we said, what would you like to do? This is going to be a really big task for you, and so we want to kick it off with something that would be really special.
Mr. Rogers?
Hey, Jeff. I'm glad to see you. Thank you very much for coming by. Can you tell my friends what it is that made you need this wheelchair?
Sure. Well, when I was about 7 months old, I had a tumor, and it broke the nerves to tell my hands and legs what to do.
I see.
And I got a wheelchair when I was 4 years old.
That was your first one when you were 4.
Uh-huh.
He told Jeff before they started that they would have a chat and then sing a song together.
I think he said we might sing a song.
Yeah.
Because I was sort of surprised. What, he's going to start singing a song? This is totally not even what song.
It's you I like. It's not the things you wear. It's not the way you do your hair. But it's you I like. The way you are right now. The way down deep inside you. Not the things that
I do.
not your fancy chair. That's just beside you. But it's you I like. Every part of you. Your skin, your eyes, your feelings, whether old or new. I hope that you'll remember, even when you're feeling blue. It's you I like. It's you yourself. It's you.
It's you. What?
It is you I like, Jeff.
Thanks.
And there must be times when you do feel blue.
Uh-huh.
I'm not feeling blue right now, though.
Me neither.
I'm so glad that you came today.
Thanks.
I remember asking one of the staff people that was there, well, you know, what do you think? Did it go okay? Don't, this is good, this is good.
He had his surgery and he survived. Certainly Mr. Rogers had an impact on who Jeff became, his sense of self.
I think that man is the exception to your rule. Every time the wife tried to say something, he cut her off. But, did y'all notice that too? What I see and what I hear in that is Mr. Rogers realizing that life and everything in it that he's been given is a gift. And he's inviting those who cannot repay him and giving Jeff that gift as well.
Well, I think that sometimes the way we're taught, we look at certain people as lesser than. I always love in the scriptures where, Jesus performs the miracle on the blind man who was born blind, or somebody healing and, your sins. It all comes down to sins. And I think that if you come from an orientation or perspective, of the original sin, that all of us are born with that original sin, that somehow saying that means that we are in objection to God, that we are against God, that our nature is against God. And when I read scriptures, and I especially read this passage that Jesus talks about, is that that's not true. That all of us in that knowing that each of us are divinely loved. And that in our being, we were created to be in relationship to God and with each other. And it's that interrelationship, because remember that first not good is that we be alone. But you don't exactly get to choose who's your neighbor, or who's at your table, or who's part of your community. And so we tend to be a little prejudiced, but when you come from the standpoint of that everything that has life is sacred and from God, you value and honor that diversity and that love at the table, and that people like the little boy in the wheelchair, instead of asking why, can you not see God's grace and love through his smile? He has a certain gift that someone who is a healthy child doesn't impart. I'm not saying that was a desire or deserve, but they're just, the people who tend to struggle tend to be angels flying too close to the ground, and you see something very special and sacred in them, and if you don't have a place for them at the table and see who they really are, you miss something special and divine from God that is coming through them by not having a relationship with them. And God's table is always much larger than ours. And some of the most wonderful experiences I've had in my life has been getting and knowing the other people who aren't like me, people who have different struggles. As a pediatric nurse, I worked in the HEMOC floor, so I worked with kids with cancer, but kids with AIDS. At a time when we were scared of people with AIDS, and AIDS became a real sinful disease. And I remember there wasn't a lot that people knew about. Some people would just take a tray into a 2-year-old and leave the tray, and how's the baby supposed to eat? And I made it my mission to go and feed them, give them a bath, tuck them into bed, and read them a story and say a prayer. Because they weren't sinful creatures. They were divine, loving beings from God. And they taught me more than I ever did for them. And to not allow or to fight for the place at the table, and to not see the beauty of the boy in the wheelchair, or the person who's sick, or the person who's blind. You miss an opportunity to share that grace and a little bit of divine wisdom that comes from that relationship.
I agree. I'm going to show, we got one more quick video clip with Mr. Rogers and Jeff Erlanger, and dovetailing off of what you just said. Look at Fred's face as Jeff Erlanger comes into the room. And you know the feeling when you give something to someone expecting nothing in return. What a gift it is to you to give that gift to someone else. And I think for me, this passage that Jesus is saying is, as long as we're exalting ourselves, as long as our fists are clenched around things that we need to try to keep and control and to maintain on our own, our hands cannot open to receive the gift that I think Fred is about to receive. There's no faking the face on this, in my mind. Can you play this one, Kate?
Please welcome Jeffrey Erlanger.
It's an honor to be here tonight, to be part of this proud moment. You know, when you tell people that it's you I like, we know that you really mean it. And tonight, I want to let you know that on behalf of millions of children and grown-ups, it is you that I like. Absolutely.
Well, to Jeff Erlanger and all of the wonderful neighbors who have grown up with our neighborhood, this was, of course, completely unexpected, and what a wonderful gift. And I thank the Academy for allowing this to happen. Jeff and I haven't been together for a while. We met when he was, I think, 4 years old. 5. Such good neighbors. Well, this is what I wanted to tell you before I knew that I'd have this great gift tonight. Fame is a 4-letter word. And like tape or Zoom or face or pain or life or love, what ultimately matters is what we do with it. I feel...
He mentions the word gift a number of times. As I sort of close out my part, I think about Fred Rogers here giving his gift to Jeff that could never be repaid, and the incredible gift that Jeff gave back to Fred in that moment. If that brought a tear to your eye or a little bit of a lump in your throat watching that, then I think about what Marta said, and I think she's absolutely right. It's because that divine spark or that divine gift is inside you already. And as we get ready to celebrate communion, I think about another gift that we've been given. The ultimate unclenching of fists and taking the lowest place that Jesus Christ did by giving us his bread and body.
So we learn through what Jesus is teaching, and Mr. Rogers is just an amazing teacher, is that we embark on what's considered a new beginning. We ourselves can open up to this radical humility of heart, which is the true strength, and to look not through expectation of what we think things should be according to society or what we think our neighborhood should look like, but accepting the radical grace of every single person as sacred and loved, and loving back and being loved. Sacredness is a birthright. It's not something that is a privilege. It is something that is not just a feature of your life. It's true to who you are. And you, just as you are good enough and loved by God. And that is more important than any status, than any culture or community. And so as a neighbor and as a congregation, you do this. You live in love of one another. Doesn't mean you always get along. Doesn't mean you always agree. But you see the gift and love in every person. That the life's essence is pure grace. And it is that pure grace that invites you to the table. It's the fellowship of each other in love, bounded by the love of God, and saying, it's you. I see the sacred in your eyes, and I see the grace and light of God.